Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Peyman, and today with me is Mr. Jason James. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm great, man. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you very much for coming on. Jason, just to get things started, can you tell us just briefly a little about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm a writer. I'm an essayist. I've been writing for over 20 years. Recently, became popular out of nowhere, which I don't really know how that all happened. But yeah, that's basically me in a nutshell, man. I'm a writer. I've written everything from essays to music to screenplays. I've spent my life just jotting down words. That kind of sums me up.
And you're based out of Richmond?
I'm in Alberta now.
Ah, you ran away for freedom.
Yeah, no, yeah, we were located in Richmond, BC. For viewers who are not from BC, that's a town about 20 minutes south of Vancouver. Yeah, I mean, I was born in Alberta, but raised in Richmond. We moved to Richmond when I was 2 years old, and aside from some stints in the United States, I lived there for most of my life.
So this episode is going to progressively get more serious, and we're going to touch on things like immigration. I came across your article, and I thought it was fantastic regarding how your life growing up in Richmond and how things changed. Can you give us like a recap of that, please?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess we could start at 1995 was when it really started. Richmond, for people who aren't aware, was a small fishing town, very blue collar, where I grew up. It was, you know, middle to lower middle class, lower income families, single moms, that sort of deal. My mom was a single mom, and summer of 1995, we had a lot of people show up from China, and which was strange because our town was, I mean, if you asked people in Vancouver where Richmond was or if they had ever been, I think the answer would be question marks for both. Um, and so we had this sudden influx of Chinese immigrants into Richmond, and then in 1996, all through my neighborhood, but all over Richmond, the modest family homes were bulldozed to the ground, and I'm talking 2 out of 3 homes, right? So like my neighborhood where I grew up was, I mean, I often say it could stand in for Kuwait or Kosovo at the time, right? Like it was a war zone. It was just piles of rubble everywhere. And, within a year, there were mansions erected where all of our houses used to be. And it was clear that something was happening. And I don't think many people knew how to put their finger on it. There was a lot of anger, of course, because, we were being driven out of our neighborhoods. And, for the most part, if people were living in those mansions, it was, housekeeper or housewives with children or just students, which was another big giant red flag because, how is it possible that, a woman with 3 kids can live in a home that's worth well over $1 million? And that's kind of what happened to my neighborhood. It was transformed over the course of like 2 years, and from that point forward, there were people in the area that started to catch on to what was happening. And there was, in my neighborhood, a childhood friend's mother was the one who figured out what was going on, and what it was a massive CCP money laundering scheme that was happening right, through our neighborhoods. And of course, she was called a racist and a bigot and all of the usual names that you call somebody for pointing out something like that. And it just slowly, progressively got worse to a point where, Richmond now in 2024 is like ground zero for the CCP's global money laundering operations, right? I mean, every week it's like there's another mansion that's being busted for operating as a hub for organized crime. And Vancouver is the main point of entry for all the fentanyl that's entering Canada, and it all has to do with what started in 1995, 96.
So first thing I'll say is, in full disclosure, I'm part of this problem as well. I came here in '89. There was a bunch of Iranians that came, so I'm sure somebody could make the same argument for West Vancouver and Iranians.
I don't
But
think so, though. I just want to interject. I don't think so, because now that what I know, and I know this just from my relationship with Sam Cooper, who's an investigative journalist. There's who's I gotta also say probably the best investigative journalist working in the world right now. He's filled in a lot of the gaps for me, and yeah, there's Iranian interference in our politics for sure, but it's not anything to the level of what China has done in Canada. It's not even close, not even remotely.
so let's start with there's so many threads to pull on, but let's go with money laundering. How do you define for most people, money laundering is when you take money, you sell cocaine, you get money, and you launder it through a Panamanian bank. How is money laundering taking place in Canada?
Well, I mean, in Vancouver specifically, and now Toronto, it's mostly done through our real estate market, right? So, just to kind of put this into brass tacks and give people a simple layman's explanation on the podcast. Um, so, for example, what happened with us was something people have to remember is that in China, the CCP is the central organization. They're like the nucleus of everything. And if you're a businessman, if you're even somewhat successful in China, you are attached to the CCP. That's the way it works. It's the way communism works. And so what happened was is that you had a lot of people who were tied into the CCP and high level figures and officials who were trying to get their money out of China. Right now, part of this I think had to do with the Chinese government specifically to gain influence in other countries, but it also had to do with just the fact that people within the CCP being worried that their wealth was going to be seized or taken away from them by that central nucleus. And so what happened was is the way it started in the beginning was it was just people looking to get their money offshore, and the way that they were able to do it was by buying foreign real estate, namely Vancouver, starting in Richmond. And then what they would do is they would send women over, sometimes their wives, sometimes just women who were looking to immigrate. They would send them over, and then they would act as money mules, so that they could send money from China via underground banks and sometimes via big banks, as we know now, into their accounts. And then that from those women, that money would be dispersed, and those women would be paid accordingly, right? And that was basically I know it sounds very, very simplistic, but that was the plan in the beginning, was to just buy up real estate, because they knew that if you buy a $350,000 home for $1 million, and then you buy the house next to it for $1 million, and you buy the house next to that house for $1 million, and then all the houses across the street for $1 million, well, then what happens is that it naturally inflates the value of all the homes, right? Because you're changing the face, you're changing the landscape of where you're buying homes. So like people in my neighborhood had bought their homes in Richmond for like $150,000 in 1983, right? And they were being offered 700,000 to 800,000 to $1 million for their homes. So naturally, a lot of people jumped on it. But what it was they were sinking their money into the real estate market in Richmond, knowing that if they did it, if they bought up enough properties, that they wouldn't lose money. The properties would only increase in value. Right. So that was where it started. And then we had birthing homes in our neighborhood where, I counted 3 of them, where you would have 10 to 15 to 20, pregnant Chinese women coming and going at any point. And the scheme there was simple too. According to Canadian law, if you have a child in Canada, that child is automatically a Canadian citizen. And so by having children in Canada, what they were doing was they were essentially giving birth to Canadian citizens, and thus extending their ability to continue laundering money for whoever was on the other side in China. And that's really how it went. And then, of course, from there it grew. Organized crime arrived. And once the organized, and the thing that people also have to know is that the organized crime groups in China are extensions of the CCP. That's the thing that everybody has to wrap their minds around, is that everything that comes out of China, it's all an extension of the communist Chinese. Like, they have their tentacles wrapped around everything. So once organized crime arrived, then that kind of changed things a little more, because they got involved in, all sorts of crime, all sorts of, drugs and illegal gambling. And then that grew into influencing our politicians, right? Via, donations and things like that, and for people who may be interested, go and look at Trudeau's Papineau riding in 2015 and all of the donations that he received and where they came from. They're mostly from Richmond, BC.
Really?
Yeah, with Chinese names.
Is that strictly, it's legal, I guess. You have to prove that the money was illegal, but otherwise the donations were legal.
Well, yeah, I mean, because they're not the way the organized crime works. It's not like bikers making meth in a bathtub, right? These are millionaires. These are people who have completely circumvented, whatever systems are in place to monitor organized crime activity, right? Like, these are businessmen. These are guys, who you never see. These are guys who are in the penthouse somewhere in the West End in Vancouver, if they're in Vancouver at all, with numbered companies that, a lot of these guys own 10, 20, 30, 40 different numbered companies. And those numbered companies are where the money is laundered through. And then that money is passed along to citizens who then, sometimes not even citizens, who then make their donations to the politicians, right? It's all very, very organized and very structured, right? I think that's the thing that we have a hard time with understanding in Canada, is that we expect organized crime to operate like bikers or the mafia, but these guys are a whole nother level. They're a whole other level. They're bureaucrats. They're in the boardroom, right? Like, they're not on the street selling, $20 bags of crack. They're in boardrooms. They own Fortune 500 companies. That's who these people are.
All right, let me play devil's advocate. I come to you and I say, so what's the big problem? That wouldn't you rather have the money be in a Canadian bank as opposed to be in like a Swiss bank? If they're buying property, the value goes up. They're paying people more money. They have more money in their pocket. What's the issue with money laundering?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, there's a million of them, but right off the bat, the issue is that we have a housing crisis in Canada now because of this, right? We have young people. I'm 41. I'm not really considered young, but I've never owned a home. I had to move to Alberta, where I'm planning on buying a home within the next year or so. But living in British Columbia, there was no hope that I was ever going to own a home. And what happens there is you're crushing your population, right? You're turning them into serfs. Because, for example, in Vancouver, my family was just one of many who became nomadic. We moved every 2 to 3 years because we would move into a place that was owned by some mysterious Chinese entity, right? 9 times out of 10, you never met your landlords. It was managed by a property manager, right? Because the landlord themselves was in China or somewhere else. But mostly because they didn't want anybody to know who they were. Right. And then you're there for 2 or 3 years, and then they decide to flip that house because the market has gone up again. So they flip the house and then they buy more houses. And so chances are that the house that you've moved out of and the house that you move into are owned by the same person behind the same numbered company. Right. And so what happens is you have a scenario now in Vancouver where, if you want to rent a 3-bedroom townhouse, what I live in right now, you're looking at $4,000 a month. Nobody has that type of money. And if you do, you're not paying $4,000 a month in rent. You got to be out of your mind to do something like that. But that's the consequence of that behavior and allowing it to continue, right? They've set up a situation where young people and just people in general can't afford rent. They can't afford the cost of living. They can't afford to buy a home. And when you have a bunch of people who don't own assets like homes, you're creating a future economic crisis for sure.
Thanks. Good answer. Here's another one. I'm running federally, but I'm a huge critic of the provincial party right now, the PCNDP.
Yeah.
They're just drifting so far towards socialism. I think it's communism. How does the money laundering tie into that, if at all?
Oh, it's huge, right? Here's the thing, right? So what we're seeing in Canada is a situation where, take the safe supply let's say safe supply, for example, right? So we have a situation in Canada where a number of provinces have opted into a program that's called safe supply, which is where the government supplies supposedly clean drugs, right, as a way, in an effort to curb the fentanyl, the drugs that are tainted with fentanyl and causing people to overdose and die. Well, what they're doing with, if you look at it with, any critical eye, is they're nationalizing drug distribution. That's socialism, right? That's what socialism does. The federal government is now Pablo Escobar, right? And it's like that with everything. And these Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, David Eby, they all love their little backroom deals that they make, the little chunks of cash. Because look, humans are fallible. We're fallible creatures, right? And socialism consumes everything because it allows room for these fallible creatures to become unbelievably corrupted. See, capitalism is not a perfect system, and I agree. I hate crony capitalism as much as anyone else, but at least in capitalism, there's an exit door. There are private companies that step in and they do the job. When you have a socialist government, they're playing the role of everything. So what happens is your entire world becomes bureaucratized. And if just a few of those people are corruptible, which you and I both know they are, what happens is that you end up with this weird, crooked form of fascism where you have outside entities and figures that are influencing them monetarily. And there's nothing you can do about it because you're trapped in the system. You probably have a vehicle. You have insurance on your car. How much do you pay ICBC every month? I guarantee you it's a rate that is fucking mind-blowing, right? And that's socialism for you. That's corruption. How many billions of dollars every year does ICBC lose and then expect you, the taxpayer, to make up for it? That's socialism. And I guarantee you it's because of corruption. There's no other reason.
I guess the question I'm asking, let's focus on, let's take Jagmeet Singh. How
Sure.
much of this is it the guy's just a piece of trash and he's like, you know what, I'm going to make some money so I can buy more Rolexes? Or how much of it is that he actually believes in the utopia at the end of socialism that is communism, so he's aligned with China? Is China pulling the strings, or is China just in partnership with this guy?
I think Jagmeet Singh doesn't believe in anything. I think Jagmeet Singh believes in whatever's best for Jagmeet Singh, but he's too stupid to understand what's actually good for him, right? The moment he signed that coalition deal, the NDP onto that coalition deal with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, he signed away his career as a politician, right? But it's because Jagmeet Singh isn't smart enough to play the game right. He's not smart enough to do it in a way that at least somewhat maintains favor with his voting base, right? So with Jagmeet Singh, I think, yeah, he's completely corrupt. He's totally corrupt. But Jagmeet Singh is emblematic of communists. Communists don't believe in communism. The ones at the top, they never do. They know it's a sham, but they know that it's going to benefit them directly if they maintain that. So Jagmeet Singh and all of his, talk about workers and unions and socialism and so on and so forth, it's just a ploy to hook in stupid people and reel them in and make them believe that the state's going to take care of them. Jagmeet Singh is no different than Joseph Stalin. They're the same person. It's just Jagmeet has no power. So to answer your question, I think he's just unbelievably corrupt, and he would sell his soul to anybody who would put up enough money to buy it. And Justin Trudeau just so happened to do it. He's going to get him to his pension, and then that's that.
Yeah, that pension thing really boils my blood. Before leaving this issue with Richmond, I'm going to throw out some dates, and please don't fact check me. My memory is horrible. So 1971, Pierre Trudeau changes the Immigration Act, so it's no longer European immigration. I believe 1986, Brian Mulroney takes away the requirement for immigrants to prove that they can support themselves financially when they get here. I'm guessing the same year was Expo in Vancouver. Which one of these most impacted 1995, where you started seeing a massive influx of Chinese immigrants?
Well, I'd say Trudeau, because Trudeau opened the door to China, right? Like Trudeau wrote a book. I can't remember what it's called. I've read it. It's so terrible. It's about his travels through communist China, and the book itself is not a flattering uh, memoir. It's not flattering toward the communist Chinese at all. I mean, he's kind of poking fun at how stupid they all are, and how the whole thing is held together by glue and elastic bands, but he himself and Richard Nixon were part of an initiative to bridge the gap and bring China into the West. And so it begins with Trudeau. Mulroney continues it. And, I was too young to really remember the 80s, but I've heard people say that Canada started to change around then. I just remember 1995 specifically because I had friends who were Chinese, whose parents were working people, and I I had a scenario where a friend of mine's dad believed that the neighbors were spying on him, that they were CCP spies, because he was an exile from mainland China who had escaped to Taiwan and then later immigrated to Canada. And at the time, I thought that was so crazy, just so crazy. But now, knowing what I know, those people were more than likely spies. So I put 1995 as my date just because that's where it first became relevant to me, but it could have started way before that.
Fair enough. Okay, I'm going to hit you with a very simple question and take time answering it. What does citizenship mean to you?
Man, I'll give you a one-word answer: patriotism. I think what citizenship means is that you belong to a country, to a culture, right? Or a variety of cultures within a nation, but that you're part of a gigantic community, and you don't agree with everybody, but being a citizen, right? Being a Canadian citizen means you're part of it. And I think part of that, a big part of that requires a significant amount of patriotism, because if you're not a patriot, then what are you? Right. And I think patriotism and citizenship should go hand in hand. I mean, your family immigrated here. I guarantee you, your family are probably very proud to be Canadians, I would imagine. Right. And when they travel abroad and people ask them where they're from, do they say Iran or do they say Canada? And I guarantee they probably say Canada because they're proud of what they're a part of. And so I think that defines citizenship.
Follow-up question. What would you like if you were going to describe Canada, the Canadian dream? What would you say the Canadian dream is? Or what's the vision Canada offers?
Offers now, or offered 10 years ago, right? There's a big difference.
Let's say it offered in like the 1960s, like before things went crazy.
Oh, well, it was a what's the word that I'm looking for here? It was a level-headed alternative to American global hegemony. I think maybe I'm giving too much of a general answer here, but Canada was always a much more peaceful alternative to the chaos of America, right? Canada was where Americans came when they wanted to escape the mayhem, right? Canada was always a second tier country, but a diplomatic powerhouse. We held the world together in a lot of ways, and I think that was what established Canada on the global stage, right? Now, what did Canada offer people who are coming here? Stability, security, right? We were a place where you could come and you could go to school and get a job and buy a home and afford to take your family on vacation once a year, and you were safe. There wasn't much crime. It was very middle of the road, right? There was good and bad, but at least you had security. Canada now, what defines Canada now? Well, I mean, I don't know, Peyman, what do you think?
Uh, what do I think? Chaos, the erosion of rule of law, corruption, socialism, communism, nothing positive.
There you go. Yeah, what defines Canada now is corruption and communism, right? The world, our allies, our Five Eyes allies, are backing away from us, right? I think that's the main issue that nobody's talking about. Our allies are leaving us. And why is that? Well, it's because it's very, very obvious that we're in bed with China. And the United States recently, in a Pentagon report, which was based off of Sam Cooper's reporting, um, stated that they believe that Canada is the gateway to the United States for Chinese fentanyl. They believe that Canada has opened the door to the United States for China. So that's horrifying for us because we rely heavily on the United States for a number of things, for trade, but also military strength, right? So what's happening is we're being left in the dust by our allies, and Britain and Australia and New Zealand are starting to see us in the same light because they're dealing with the same problems. But Canada seems to be the only one that is perfectly comfortable courting China in the way that we have.
Do you think America is going to allow Canada to turn into like a Mexico, but on the northern border?
I don't think so, but that's also a scary prospect, right? Because what does it look like for the United States to annex part of Canada? What does that mean for us, right? Now I'm in Alberta, where I think we would gladly go in an instant, right? But but what does that mean for the United States to step in? And look, the Biden government's not going to do it because there's a lot of evidence that the Chinese have embedded themselves in that government. But I think it's safe to say that Donald Trump will be the president of the United States come November 2024, if he makes it, right? Because that's a big question mark too. So what happens when Trump's reelected, and what happens when they start to lock down on security? What happens to Canada, and what happens when they decide that we're too much of a liability just to be on their border? I think that's a scary thought, and I don't know. I don't know what that means, but I could see a future where if Trudeau is reelected, that we do see some military action along our border. I don't know what that means, but something.
Yeah, I'm guessing they're not going to send fighter jets over and start bombing us, but they'll probably give an ultimatum to Trudeau, say, "Listen, you're going to have to let us embed some officers and agents in your country, or we will invade."
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I don't know. I know that we have taken a backseat to Mexico as the United States' major trade partner, which is hugely critical. That's another thing that people don't really know much about or haven't paid much attention to. But we've become number 3 in this trade partnership, right? And that's really scary because we rely on the United States a lot economically. So the fact that they're more interested in trading with Mexico, and this is a huge opportunity for Mexico, right? So the more Mexico can provide, and remember, Mexico is a country that is largely ran by criminals, by the cartels. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the United States government is more comfortable dealing with Mexican cartels than they are dealing with the Trudeau liberals. And it's for fear of how involved China is in our political machinations, which I think the United States knows more than we do, and knows something that I mean is devastating to us, to the Canadian identity, and to what it means for us in the future.
So before coming back to that, I had another question for you. So you told me what you think of citizenship and the vision of Canada. What do you think is the purpose of immigration? When do you need it? When does it go too far?
I mean, the purpose of it, I've always been so I'm from the left, right? Like I'm an old school liberal, not a radical leftist nut job. I still have all my sexual organs, in case anybody's wondering. But yeah, I mean, with immigration, I think, yeah, I think immigration's a beautiful and wonderful thing, right? Because it brings people from all over the world into your nation, and extends the community, right? And when done right, like Canada did for so many decades, it's wildly successful. But where we're at now is that we are importing anybody and everybody, and a lot of the wrong people into our country, just based on the notion that, well, I mean, there's the message that the Trudeau Liberals send, which is, Canada's a welcoming nation and everybody's welcome here. But I think the true the true meaning behind what we're seeing now is that they're looking to replace voters because they know that if things remain as they are, the Liberal Party might not even exist in the not so distant future. And I think that's really what this is about. I think the first part is, again, going back to China, because their entire goal is to subvert and destabilize Western nations, and immigration is like the perfect way to do it. Because when you import, say 100,000 people from Syria who have just spent the last 10 years of their lives having everything explode around them, and you bring them to this country and you say, here, go, right? That's not going to work out as intended, right? We have these fairy tales that we tell ourselves where if we bring in 20,000 Palestinians, that they're just going to mix in and everything's going to go extremely well. These are people who have watched their whole lives fall apart, watched their brothers and mothers and sisters get blown to pieces by bombs. And we're going to import those people here and expect them to just mix in culturally and just get along. But that's not the reality. And so what I'm saying is that the way the Trudeau Liberals have approached immigration is incredibly irresponsible. And we've imported a number of people into our country who are definitely a problem.
I've been browsing Twitter X Spaces the last few months, and in the last few weeks, like I would say the last 2 weeks, the level of hatred and vitriol towards immigrants has just escalated. Like people have reached their boiling point. And then yesterday, the Trudeau Liberals announced that they're going to bring in even more Gazan refugees if they're somehow tangentially related to somebody here. I understand the concept of importing voters, but do these people have no self-awareness? Do they not realize they're just going to get wiped out in the next election?
I don't think that they think that's going to happen, because I think that they have some tricks up their sleeves in terms of jerry rigging our next election. I think much like this election coming up in the United States, the election in 2025 in Canada is going to be so chaotic and so criminal. And there's going to be so many things that happen that we're just going to be sitting there with our jaws on the floor that this is even going on. I think that's their plan and their strategy. I don't think the Liberals plan on going anywhere. Right? We have China so deeply involved in influencing our elections that I think that the Liberals believe that China is going to be able to pull off the alley-oop for a third time. Right? And I wouldn't be surprised if they do. I just don't know what that means for us, because I don't think this time around Canadians are going to sit back and just accept the results if we know that there's a significant amount of cheating and foreign interference, and we end up with the same government again, knowing where this country is going. I just don't see that resolving itself quietly, right? And I don't know what that means, but I just think that what they always try to do, and I'll use you as an example, right? Your family arrived in Canada, probably escaping fundamentalist Islam in Iran, right? And you all came here. You were successful, right? And I'm sure your parents are living happily, and everybody in your family is enjoying life. That's a success story, right? That's the story that we want to hear about immigration. But that's the picture and the story that the Liberals try to sell everybody. But what's happening is that people are realizing that your story is not applying to this new batch of people coming in, because they're not being vetted in the way that I'm sure your family was, right? And that's where I think the vitriol is coming from. And I just think Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are just interested in importing as many people as possible, because the more people they import, the more votes they're importing for themselves, right?
Okay, this is good. And if I keep asking you the same question, it's not because you're frustrating me. It's because I want the audience. Okay. I know what the audience wants. It is in lay terms, after all. We're just normal people. The unions, yesterday, a post hit Twitter X. The unions have come out and they're what do you call it? They're rallying the government to take all the illegals and give them permanent residency status.
Mhm.
Like, what's in it for the unions to do this?
Oh, dues. Because look, okay, so let's say this. You know what's going to happen, right? A lot of these people who are coming over, even if you're a doctor, you're not going to be a doctor. You're going to be a framer or a roofer, or, if you're lucky, a carpenter, right? So what these unions see is they see money, right? They see the amount of money that these illegal immigrants can potentially generate for them. That's what it boils down to, right? Look, I was a fan of unions for years, and I think in some ways they do a great job. But really, at the end of the day, they're all about the dollars, and they know that if they can lobby the government to make these people permanent residents, that at least 30% of them are going to enter into some form of unionized work, if not more, right? And so that's what they're after. They just see an opportunity to grab more money, right? And I know that the federal government is not trepidatious about granting these people permanent residency or citizenships, because that's what the goal is anyways. They need these people to vote. So it's just, a little bit for the unions, a little bit for the federal government, and the rest of us get to suffer.
Okay, here's another question for you. Our current MP in my riding, West Vancouver, Patrick Weiler, he's a white guy. He's
Mm-hmm.
got white parents. He's got like all of his friends in the community are white, and how like I can understand if you got an evil Jagmeet Singh up there and he doesn't care about anything, but this guy has roots in the community. Presumably they don't want their country to get ruined. Like, walk me through what's going on through this guy's head.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, part of it is ideology. I think that actually makes up a lot of it. Is, the best and the brightest don't enter politics, right? The best and the brightest go into engineering and the occupations that are going to allow them to use the mind that they have. Most of these guys who enter politics are just scumbags. They wouldn't be, if they weren't a politician, they'd be a used car salesman or a telemarketer, right? Like they're scumbags. And so really, with most of them, all they're really thinking about is how they benefit personally. And I'm sure that this guy has made deals with people that have benefited him greatly, and maybe a position for him somewhere on some board once his time as a politician is done. That's what he's thinking about. He's not thinking about you. He's not thinking about his riding and the people that he's looking after. I mean, none of them are, right? And that's the problem. Our system has devolved into this situation where we have just a whole lot of people thinking for themselves and looking to benefit in any way that they can, whether it be wealth or a position after they're done. But that's what it boils down to. I don't know what this gentleman has done specifically, but I can say to you, if you're not happy about what he's doing, or if he's on board with this, number one, he's probably bought into the ideology, right? That radical leftist ideology. And he's only bought into it because he's an idiot, and two, because it benefits him in some way.
Uh, Another article I came across, Brad Salzberg, he's got the Cultural Action Party, I believe, in BC. It's a provincial party. And he released an article today talking about how just this increase of benefits, race-based benefits, it never
Mm-hmm.
benefits white people. It's always this minority, that minority. Um, Putting aside the constitutionality of it, to me, it's not constitutional. But like, what is the Liberal Party hoping to do by alienating all Canadian white people?
Well, they're hedging their bets on the minorities to vote for them, right? That's what they're doing, is they're trying to buy votes. Because look, dyed in the wool liberals will vote liberal no matter what, right? All of the people in Vancouver, for example, who you see voting for the NDP, election after election, despite the fact that they're sinking, right? They're ideologues, and the way they look at it is, yeah, white people have had their time. Let's equity, right? That's what they've bought into. So when you see like race-based politics or race-based policy, the white liberals are more than happy because they've been brainwashed into believing that they're evil, and now it's time for these other people to have a chance and that they're privileged. So let me step back from my privilege and let's let these other people have a shot at this, which I'm sure, going back to yourself, and I only use you as a proxy because I'm talking to you, but I'm sure your parents would hear about these policies and laugh at how ridiculous it is that somebody is getting, extra special preferential treatment based on the color of their skin. I'm Métis. I'm half Plains Cree Indian. I've turned down all of the added extras that I get offered because I don't want special treatment. I don't need anybody patronizing me, nor do I need the state taking credit for any success that I've created for myself. But that's what it is, right? The liberals and the NDP will continue with their race-based politics because, number one, it benefits them on the side of votes. They know that the radical left, the white radicals, will view what they're doing as being a benefit, and then just the majority of us in the middle and some of us and the few on the right are the only ones who kind of see it as being something wacky or stupid. So in a way, it's very calculated, right? It's just a way of securing the votes with the minority groups. Of course, securing votes with minority groups secures votes with white liberals, and then the rest of us will probably vote conservative, and we'll see how it washes out, right?
So we're winding down the show, and I wanted to end on a positive note.
Sure.
Where do we go from here to turn this ship around?
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what can be done. There's days where I feel like we're too far gone, right? Because let's look at this on a federal level, right? Let's just say everything 2025 comes and everything goes, in favor of what people like you and I desire, and I think most Canadians, which is get rid of Trudeau, put Poilievre in. Well, Pierre Poilievre is going to inherit the biggest mess I think any Canadian politician will ever inherit, right? We don't even know the level of damage that has been done economically. We have an idea, right? We've seen the ArriveCan stuff. We've seen all of the other money laundering schemes that the Trudeau Liberals have put together. We know about the housing crisis. But I think once Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives crack open the books, we're going to realize that we're in far worse condition than we thought we were. So how is Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives going to fix that? It's not going to be a quick turnaround. And I think that's the plan. I think the plan is to leave him with such a disaster that he's going to be a disaster as a prime minister as a consequence, because there's no real way that he's going to be able to fix it without serious austerity, right? And so on the positive side, to close this out on a positive note, the whole globalist scheme is falling apart, right? They're all running for the hills now. Klaus Schwab is stepping down, right? You see high-profile bankers that are stepping away because what they're trying to do is avoid any criminal prosecution that may be coming toward them. The whole scam is falling apart. The climate change scam is falling apart. Central bank digital currencies were introduced way too early. And the prospect of a digital ID was introduced way too early. They screwed it up. They screwed it up. And so that's the positive. The positive side is that the people who were involved in creating this weird global totalitarian system and if people watching this think I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist, please just go and look this stuff up, because this is what they were doing. This is what they were rolling us toward. And all of the people who were involved, you just kind of watched the dominoes fall over the course of the last few years, right? Jacinda Ardern stepped down in New Zealand. Biden is like, come on. Like, he's not there, right? And most Americans know that now that they're coming to the tail end of his first term, that he was a complete and total disaster, right? He's a corpse. And whatever machine was operating behind him just completely destroyed, brought the United States to the brink of destruction. With Trudeau, like, he's a global laughingstock. Like, I honestly don't know how this guy wakes up every morning and looks at himself in the mirror, because I would venture to guess that he is just as, if not more, despised than Vladimir Putin on a global level. right? But not in a way where people are afraid of him. Nobody's afraid of Justin Trudeau. He's just a laughing stock. He's humiliated himself on a grand scale. So the positive side of it is that it's all falling apart. But the question is, where do we go from here? Because the damage has been done. So what do we do, and how do we fix it? And I don't know if Canada, as it is today, if it can be fixed. And if it can be, then we might be looking at a scenario like where Greece is, where we have to go through serious austerity for a number of years just to get back to zero.
Yep, it's a long, windy road ahead.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a
Always,
question?
of course.
I'm always interested in hearing from people who've immigrated to Canada. In your view, and in the view of your family, does Canada resemble the world that you entered in the 1980s?
I can't speak for my parents because they're older. They went through a revolution. They've already, this fight that we're in, they already went through that. They're exhausted. So
Right.
I don't fault them for not caring. My siblings are a little bit more like me. I always tell a story when we came to Canada, 1989. We landed. My mom didn't speak English. These 3, 4 women from Ottawa volunteered to show her around, teach her English, and there's a picture of her with these 3 women. So I contrast that, these 3 white women, with me waking up one morning in 2022 and Justin Trudeau calling those white truckers racist, sexist, homophobe, transphobe, and it got me really angry. So no, this is not the country I remember. I remember they would teach us square dancing in elementary school. I remember our teachers in elementary school and middle school, they dressed nicely, sharply. They had to, they couldn't talk about politics with us. I remember once in class, I think it was grade 3, I got glue stuck on my fingers. And I said, "Oh God!" And the teacher yelled at me. Today, like I'm guessing you can say whatever you want. So no, this is not the country I immigrated to. It's completely, completely changed.
Yeah. And I guess, you can't speak for your parents, but I'd imagine that when they arrived here, they were very, very grateful that they made it. And I imagine that they were probably very successful in whatever fields they were in. And if they were, like you said, they're tired. They went through a revolution, right? They've been through this once. They don't need to go through it again. But what I always think about is people like your parents, because my wife's mother immigrated from the Philippines 40 years ago. My wife was born and raised in Canada. And I talked to her about it, and she's heartbroken by what she's seen our country become, right? And there's always this story of immigrants and racism, and that's the story that the liberals tell. But most people, I would assume this would be the same for your parents, but they came to a place where they were widely accepted. And yeah, maybe they dealt with, ignorant people at certain points in their life, like all of us do. But for the most part, they came to this country and prospered, and that country doesn't exist anymore. And that's who I always think about, are those people who came here, escaped a revolution, right? Or in my mother-in-law's case, escaped poverty, certain poverty in Philippines, came here and worked their way out of it and made something for themselves and had children here and turned this place into something great. And to just see it all get thrown away. That's who I think about.
No, you're absolutely right. If I can follow up on that, when my parents came here and when your mother-in-law came here, they had something that was called individual responsibility. So
Yeah.
you bring a child into this world, you are responsible for feeding that child. At some point after 89, we lost that. And now we have a welfare state. And with a welfare state, it comes with strings attached. You no longer have freedom. If you don't have freedom, that fire, the flame that burns within you, that gets suffocated. That's gone. And now your people are depressed. They're walking around like zombies. That's the number one difference. So when we don't have property rights in our charter, we had it in the Bill of Rights, we had it under English common law, and when you had property rights back in the 80s and 90s, you come here, you work, build a business, the government leaves you alone. That's
Mm-hmm.
gone. And now, like you said earlier, we're basically serfs. We have to do whatever the government says.
Yeah. Well, that's the expansion of the state, right? It suffocates everything. And, I'm assuming that's why you're running for office. And, I think more people need to follow your lead. I think this is the way. Okay, let's close on a high note. I think the way we get out of this is through people like you. I think the way we get out of this is from citizens stepping up and saying, no, okay, no, I'm running. I'll run. I'll be an MP, or I'll run for the school board, or I'll run for whatever. Right. I think that's the way we get out of it is just regular logical people stepping up and taking on that civic responsibility. Right. But on the same hand, it's like how many of those people are corruptible? What happens when you get in there and that first, envelope of cash arrives on your desk, right? What happens when they tell you, hey, you play ball, or, we got some triads over here who know how to handle things. That's, you know what I mean? But I think the starting point is for people like yourself to step forward and run for office. Say, yeah, I'm going to fix it. I'll step in. I'll do my best to get us out of this hole that we're in. And if we could have that 338 times all throughout our country, then I think we're in a much better shape. The problem that Canada has right now is that we don't have outsiders running, right? We don't have a Trump. We don't have a Robert Kennedy, right? So although Pierre Poilievre is enticing and he's attractive, he's still a politician. He's still part of the establishment. He's still playing by those rules. And we need rule breakers. We need people that step in, like the Javier Mileys of the world, who are going to cut off all the fat, cut out all of the people who are getting paychecks for doing absolutely nothing, and bring us back to some semblance of normalcy.
No, I agree with you. As we're winding, just to end on this note, you have also done some great stuff. You have a podcast, and you're also stepping up. Can you tell the audience where they can go to find that?
Sure. You can find me on X at JasonJamesBNN, or you can find me at bravenewnormal.substack.com. Podcast is called Brave New Normal, but you can find all of my essays that I write there. You can find the podcast there, or you could just find the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. It's all over, audio streamers, YouTube, Rumble, X, all that stuff. So yeah. Mostly bravenewnormal.substack.com or X JasonJamesBNN.
Mr. James, thank you very much for coming on.
Dude, thank you so much. And I just want to continue to encourage you to do what you're doing, man. I think you're a great voice. And anytime you want to have me back, I'll stick around for longer next time. I feel like you and I just started talking. So anytime you want to have me back on, man, just reach out and we'll do it.
I'll take you up on that offer.